My ancestor who came here was Stephen H. Ludlow, and he came in 1836, soon after the Ingham County was surveyed. The first person in this country came in 1647, and he was born in Matlock, Derbyshire, England. His father was a miller. He was a miller with him, and in the 1640s, there was a civil war, the big civil war in England that encompassed almost the whole country. The Royalists, and the parliamentarians were fighting each other. I'm talking about war, real war. And much of it centered on the Midlands, which is where Derbyshire is, because Charles I left London and went to Nottinghamshire, which is right next door. The royals had people here, the parliamentarians had people here, and that part in the middle where they were some and some is where a lot of the fighting took place. But it took place all over the country. And by 1645, they had destroyed crops, greens, cattle. The royalists especially would go through and just burn everything, tear through it, and just destroy it. And so by 1645, William Ludlow had 8 children. He was about 40 years old, working for his father, or with his father. His mother died in 1645. His wife died in childbirth with the 8th child in 1646. And I think it's 1647 when he left, because there he is, a widower with many small children. Well, some were teenagers. And the mill was obviously in trouble because it was a grist mill, and everything was destroyed. I think there might have been some political differences with his father, too. I found some evidence of that. He left for Long Island. One of the reasons he came to Long Island is because his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, had already come to Long Island a couple of years before that, and they were setting up a new settlement there. So this is 25, 26, 27 years after the Mayflower that these people were coming to Long Island. We have records on quite a few of them. I have a little tiny map that I copied out from something in the Burton collection that identified the people and where they lived. 2 or 3 houses here, 2 or 3 houses here. And William, our William, Ludlam, Ludlam at that time, was the miller who came to join that settlement at his brother-in-law's invitation. He lived there for the rest of his life. He was, within a few years, all of his children came, except one, from England, and joined him there. I don't know that he ever remarried. He died in 1665. His will was the first will filed in New York, because there was no New York or no New York City until that time. That was the year New York City became a town and became the seat of places you filed wills. And we do have his will. In other words, he was a pioneer in early Southampton, is where they were. And the children for the next 4 generations lived in Southampton, East Hampton, West Hampton, Bridgehampton, but they all of the Henrys all the way down the line were the Millers. In 1791, one of the Henrys and his brother Silas left Long Island and came to upstate New York. I can't imagine the journey. I just can't imagine that. When Henry and Silas, brothers, and the son of Henry came in 1791, Thomas, the son, and Julia, his wife, had with them their firstborn son, 1789. And they traveled, and a lot of them came. A lot of the families came, of the family came. But they traveled from Long Island to upstate New York across, the roads were cut then. They didn't have easy travels. They had to hack their way through. They were coming into an area that had been the Iroquois nation until very shortly before that. And they came to Standing Stone in Pennsylvania. And Julia says in her diary, "We left Standing Stone and came to the head of the lake. And the head of the lake is Cayuga Lake. And they were headed for 6 miles up the lake to nothing, a place where they had bought a lot." The military tract, after the Revolutionary War, was taken violently from the Indians to be the bounty land for the Revolutionary War soldiers, awards for good service. The military tract was 1,800,000 acres in the Finger Lakes area. It was surveyed into 28 townships of 60,000 acres each, and then 100 lots of 600 acres each in each township. So when Henry and Silas took a lot, they got 600 acres. And that's a hunk of property. They went up the river, the Salmon Creek, it was a river, about a mile, where there were some good falls. This is the Salmon Creek Falls. And so they knew they had water power. They knew they could build a mill there. They're still millers. And they settled there. Other people joined them pretty soon. After a few years, it becomes, Ludlow Town, and then after a while, Ludlowville. And it still is Ludlowville today. Other people came in, and they are names that come to Michigan. I'll give you some of those names later. But the person who had the military tract surveyed was Governor DeWitt Clinton. Should be a familiar name here. Surveyor was his sister's son. I don't know, his name is DeWitt, but I don't know what his last name was. The person who was granting the military land, the bounty land, was John Lansing. He was Secretary General to General Schuyler, State Controller, and was in charge of granting the lands. The servicemen had to go in person to his house in Troy to make their case for having the land. His house was still standing in 1953. I don't know. I haven't checked it later. Henry and Silas took lot 76 in the military tract. Premium property, strong water power, and it's been suggested that Silas, the brother, had a connection to John Lansing. Some people in the family say that Silas Ludlow married John Lansing's daughter. That can't be true. I've checked that 1,600 times. So is Jerry Lawler from this Capitol when he was keeping all the legislative records. The dates don't work. And John Lansing didn't have a sister named Mary. So no daughter, no Mary. But that's where it is. Some way they had prime property. Anyway, they settled there with their many families, and by this time the family is bigger and bigger and bigger. And you jump along until they decide to make the next jump to Michigan. So when the bounty land opens up mid-New York State, they jump there, and they're pioneers there. They jump to Michigan soon after the surveying is done, and they are the pioneers here. So it's an interesting thing about how that pioneering spirit, starting over, going on, ran through the family. Back in Ludlowville in Tompkins County, Eventually, the townships were separated off, and the area in Tompkins County where most of them came from, who came to Michigan, was called Lansing. So the township was named after John Lansing. And then they changed the name of the little town that's near Ludlowville to Lansing, and then the East Lansing. And when they came here, of course, they brought the Lansing name with them and actually changed the name of the capital city here. Because when they came here, it was before Lansing was the capital. Anyway, in Michigan, Stephen Ludlow is the first person who comes. And he bought property in Aurelius Township. He bought 240 acres of Section 16 on September 6th, 1836. Ingham County was finished surveying in 1835. And so that pattern of when the surveying is done, then you can move in. When the surveying is done here, you can move in, and so on. He bought more property in Jackson County, in fact, quite a bit of it, and in Eaton County. And of course, then families started coming in. Many of the Ludlow families, by the way, they were Ludlows by the time they got to Finger Lakes area. We don't know why the name changed from Ludlam to Ludlow. Hard to distinguish Ludlow and Ludlam. When you're handwriting it, A-M-O-W, looks just the same. So at some point they changed it to Ludlow. And I suspect it was because there were very famous and very rich Ludlows, royally connected. And they just decided to give it up and become Ludlows. I don't know. The Ludlow family actually came into this country 50 years after William Ludlam came to Long Island. But the Ludlow family say that they are the progenitors of all of the Ludlows in the United States. No, they're not. But can't believe that. They're the ones who get all the records for them. They're the ones who get patents from the King of England for land in the colonies, as they say, in the colonies. Huge tracts of land. William Pitt, not a relative, got Pennsylvania, big enough patent on that land. They turned into Pennsylvania. One of the things, too, is that when the colonies were established, they were all on the East Coast, obviously. But their patents stretched very long and narrow across the United States to the west, and actually came all the way farther than the Appalachian Mountains. They were into Ohio. So if you've ever heard Cleveland called the Western Reserve, that's because that was the Western Reserve of Connecticut. Virginia ran all the way to, I don't know, not quite as far as the Mississippi River. Virginia ran others. They just had huge tracts of land. So that comes into the time when the Revolutionary War is going on. They're fighting over keeping that land and separating from England. Not everybody is in favor of that. There are a lot of people who are Tories. And the Tories who want to stay connected to England, they have to leave the land. They have to leave. So in New York City, they had to leave. And they went to New Brunswick, many of them. And they simply stayed there until the war got over. And then they were able to come back and recover their property. These are the rich ones. So the people who came here after 1791, I'm sorry, I should go a little bit later than that, in the 1800s, they came on the Erie Canal. Erie Canal is right up the lake, right up Cuyahoga Lake, to the canal. It was established in 1825, It had been underway for 7 or 8 years. Governor DeWitt Clinton was in charge of that. He had been pursuing it for a very long time. And when I found out doing this was that there was also a suggestion for a canal in Ohio, going from the Erie River south to the Ohio River. And it was a national effort by Washington, General Washington, President, and then Thomas Jefferson, to build these canals in the early 1800s. It's amazing to think about what was going on. But they, of course, had to get the land set, and they started issuing proclamations to clear the land and clear the Native Americans. And so treaties are signed, so to speak, and then broken, and signed and broken in New York State, in Ohio, and then in Michigan when they started coming here, the same thing. Treaties are signed. Native Americans are moved off their land, supposedly. And it's an amazing look at the fact that the people in my family who came as pioneers on Long Island, in mid-New York, and then in Michigan, also carries with it an an equal word. We're pioneers, but we also take the land. It's the same system. So it's kind of strange to think about that. Very strange. The people who came here to the Lansing area, my direct relative, West Hampton Ludlow, a cousin of the Stephen who came here, and West Hampton Ludlow actually came here earlier. He was born on Long Island, too. He worked for his older brother in the 1800s. His brother, who was building canal boats in Union Springs, which is almost at the head of Lake Kyoga. And later, he owned his own barge business on the canal. And he sold that business in 1846 to have money to move to Michigan. He was a man who had been a widower. He had 5 children. His wife died in Ludlowville. Later, almost immediately, he married another woman from town because he had 5 little children. She died in childbirth. She had 5 little children. I think he married his second wife 6 weeks later. And they obviously were at Union Springs for a while before they came to Michigan. West Hampton came in 1846, and he came to Jackson County. And many of the relatives and friends and their families had already come before we were developed here in 1836 and 37. They were already in Jackson County. So Stephen Ludlow talks about coming the usual way down the canal, down to Buffalo. The canal ran from the Hudson River to Lake Erie. And that meant, when it was opened, that there was direct water connection to the Hudson River, to Lake Erie, which people could get into the Great Lakes that way. And so the Northwest Territory, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin, they were all connected to the Erie Canal. From the other end at Albany, Buffalo here and Albany, at Albany you could go down the Hudson River and go to New York City. Dick Howell from Ludlowville, New York, lived on the canal boats every summer with his family. They went down Lake Cayuga to the Erie Canal and then ran between Buffalo and Albany all summer long. When he was 12, his father let him lead a team, horses or mules, on the towpath to pull the boat. They often went on to New York City just to visit. Later, he ran his own canal boat for several years, decades. And he said there were about 5,000 canal boats. The loads ran as high as 250 tons on the canal boats. That canal moved goods and grains, and the effect of the canal was that it triggered large-scale commercial and agricultural growth to sparsely populated frontiers of western New York and the Northwest Territory. And it greatly expanded routes for people and trade, which had been confined to the East Coast. Now you could get through. It was an economic boost to the entire U.S. The goods could be moved at 1/10 of the cost and 1/2 the time. Goods could be shipped for $14 a ton instead of $120 a ton. Big change. By 1853, the Erie Canal carried 62% of all of the trade in the U.S. Manufactured goods, furniture, stoves, clothes, shipped in bulk to the frontier, meaning Michigan and on. Raw materials, timber and furs and minerals and grains and farm products were shipped east. New York City, when that canal opened, became the most important financial center in the nation, eclipsing Philadelphia, and became the primary port for immigrants. The population in New York quadrupled between 1820 and 1850. The canal itself cost a little over $7 million. It took 8 years to build. The money was earned back in 1 year, even though they thought Clinton was crazy. He had pursued the Erie Canal for years and had coordinated, actually, with people in Ohio working on the Ohio and Erie Canal. And so once that system started working, the canal opened in 1825. A section of the Ohio and Erie Canal opened in 1827, was finished about 5 years later. That went from Lake Erie to Cincinnati, down to the Ohio River. You could go literally from New York City to the Mississippi River on the Ohio River and down to New Orleans by water. It was a major boost to the United States. I was born in Springport, and West Hampton Ludlow took property in Springport, Michigan. But I think he brought the name with him because Union Springs, where the boat building is going for the canal, where he's running his business, is in the township of Springport. I could never figure out when I was a kid how Springport got its name. It wasn't a spring and it wasn't a port. So it was called Springport. Well, I think they brought it with them in the 1840s. So I grew up close by, went to MSU, moved to Detroit, came back to Lansing with a job, and didn't find out until I got involved with local history here that Stephen Ludlow had come here first from Ludlowville. And I never knew that. I thought he was always in Jackson County, but he was here. And he came at a time when the surveying had just been done. And supposedly the story was, it was because of Biddle City. Now we're back to that Biddle City. And the story about Biddle City is kind of a myth. It's actually not true. People from mid-New York had already been coming to Jackson County for many years. It was established a few years before, 8 or 10 years before Ingham County was even surveyed. So a whole lot of the family had come from that military tract land around Ithaca to Jackson County. And they didn't come all together as a group. They came, and then a brother would come, and then another brother would come, and they would take more land north as it got surveyed, more land north. And they're naming the places after the places in mid-New York. They named them Onondaga and Tompkins Township in Jackson County. They keep moving north and north and north until finally they're into what will become Ingham County. It's not separated off for quite a while. So they didn't come as one pack. Other people who came, though, early were from that New York area. Joy, Saxton, North, as in North Cemetery here in Lansing. That was a family name. Buck, Atwood, Barnes, Foote, Morehouse, Davis, Spencer, Townley. There are more. All came from that mid-New York area to Ingham County, or to nearby. And some of the earliest ones, like the Norse, they actually came before Lansing Township became a township and was surveyed. They had property next door. They just moved. They bought some more when it became available. Lots of it. This is called a lady's book, and it's a book from that people wrote in. Let's see that. It's a book that people wrote in when someone was getting married or someone was moving, and they wrote letters, notes, poems to the person who was leaving. And Clarissa Clarissa Townley Ludlow, and I believe she was I think I have the parents worked out. She was getting married. I don't know if she's married by this time or not, but I think so. I don't think so. I think this was part wedding and leaving. And I'm assuming they came here from Ludlowville, New York, or from Tompkins County anyway. And this is from G.G. Cobb, who was part of her brother's family. What though the loving heart is wrung by chilling words of cold farewell, and o'er its dying hopes is flung their echoing knell. Shall we not meet in that bright land where parting words are never spoken, and love is not a brittle band so lightly broken? Shall we not all meet there to love with love that has no trembling fears? And that dear home's far, far above this land of tears. Almost sounds like she's dying. And this is November 19th, 1854, written at West Groton, Groton, which is another center out there. And so they wrote those kinds of things in this lady's book, and it's full of these. And usually they just sign their name with a first name and an initial, because they all know each other. Some of them are from 1854, not bad. This is a picture of West Hampton Ludlow and his wife, his second wife, Anne Eliza Saxton. And when they came to Michigan in 1846, they brought with them her parents, his mother, all of their children, a brother and a sister of hers. They came in a whole crew. Most of them are buried in Campbell Cemetery down by Parma, between Springport and Parma. In fact, a whole lot of these Ludlows are buried in several cemeteries around that area. West Hampton and Anne Eliza. He's the one who was widowed, had 5 children, married Anne, and had 8 more children. So they came with 13 children. He was not only a farmer, but he was also a Baptist minister. And he traveled around Michigan to churches that asked him to come, and for a while lived in Whitehall. And he would take Eleanor, one of the daughters, with him. That's why we know so much about it. Right? He had property in Chicago because he went to Chicago to preach, bought property there. It was a it's an amazing mix of things that people do.